This event is really for our students. I just realized I had a dream last night, and I was worried about this talk. And I said, why am I worried about it? This talk is for our students. This is by students. They are the ones who choose faculty members. So I'm so honored to be part of this celebration. Dear students, the truth is that you inspire me each day and make me feel that I belong here at Fresno. So I want to start with this picture. Those who love Star Wars will love this. It's the magic of Gandhi. So I know you will love it. Yeah. So I joined Fresno State in 2014. When I came for my on-campus interview, I was a bit nervous. That was my first time to come to Fresno, and that was my first time to come to Central California. During the interview, my colleagues gave me the campus tour, and they took me to the Peace Garden. And there, I encountered a familiar face. And I was not so nervous anymore. Then I also encountered the entire family of peace activists, Jain Adams, Cesar Chavez, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I would like to thank all who gave this gift to Fresno State. And I'm also very proud to be part of this Fresno State community and the university, which is dedicated to diversity and dedicated to equity. So thank you so much. So I was born and raised in India, as you can tell from my looks or my accent. But this Harvard thing can be very confusing. Some people, my students think the first day of their classes, they expect a white male walking in the classroom. Sorry, we are talking about diversity here, right? So I grew up listening to Gandhi's stories. Gandhi led India's independence movement. And stories about his charisma and how he had awakened the spirit of India and the masses, I heard from my parents. My mother told me that even as a little girl, she participated in Gandhi's movement. And then she'll go to protests and she'll go to rallies and with her aunts and neighbors, because Gandhi really called on women to work in his movement. But the free India got divided into two countries, Pakistan and India, along the religious lines. And my parents were at that time this part of the country, which became Pakistan. And seemed like Gandhi's dream of nonviolence was shattered. Gandhi's dream of united India was shattered, because there were communal riots erupted between Hindu, Muslims, and other religious groups. And it was the time of chaos and confusion. And my parents told me that they were given 3 hours notice to leave their homes and go to India now, which will be their new home. They walked 60 kilometers before entering the now Indian border. And they told us the stories about how difficult it was. My eldest brother was 6 months old, a little over 6 months old, and my mother was carrying him in her lap. And was hot and was very difficult. So not all stories of India's independence was all romantic. It was a lot of pain and suffering that I heard. And this was the time of despair. This was a time of confusion. And some blamed Gandhi. After all, Gandhi was the leader of India's independence movement. he could have done something more, right? He could have stopped it. He could have talked to British authorities. He could have done something. And my father told me the day Gandhi was shot dead. It was January 30, 1930. And my father happened to be in that area, Delhi area, when Gandhi's funeral happened. I'd like to show you a glimpse of that event.
Ashes are all that remain of the man who symbolized India's finest aspirations. As the last religious rites are performed, a nation gives itself up to grief. For many, the vigil of prayer commenced 48 hours before, when the body of Mahatma Gandhi was placed on the roof of Birla House, in full view of the thousands who had traveled all night to pay him their last tribute. Laid on a hastily converted army truck, the body was drawn into the vast crowd lining the roads to the cremation ground. Flames strewed a saffron shower of petals over the route, while at the funeral pyre, the relatives and friends built mounds of flowers and perfumed spices high on the sandalwood lawns. Nearby with his family sat the Governor-General with officials of the government. The flower-decked cortege moved slowly through the dense throng. Tens of thousands wept openly as the body passed by them. Premier Nehru, traveling on the funeral coach with Gandhi's youngest son, appeared bewildered in his depth of grief. Closing behind, pressing forward, came a million mourners. Around the pyre, the throng became packed as the body reached its resting place.
About 2 million people attended Gandhi's funeral. My father told me the procession was about 8 to 10 kilometers long. The entire nation mourned, rather, entire world mourned Gandhi's death. The communal violence which were happening on the border virtually stopped. The world was in utter shock. The man who stood against and confronted the mightiest of the mightiest empire was taken down by one of his own. And a royal funeral was given to Mahatma Gandhi. When he died, he had only few possessions. And his possessions included a couple of sandals and little few utensils, a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and a pair of glasses. He loved his round glasses, and also a watch. Gandhi loved his watch. He was almost, some people say, was married to his watch. And because he thought that Indians were not punctual. You know, I'm sure you have heard Indian Standard Time. And he wanted to say that the reason that Indians are not making progress because they don't respect time. And he wanted to be a model. The only day that he was late was the day he was assassinated. What an irony. So Gandhi was bestowed this honor of the father of the nation. Not only that, I heard stories from my parents, we also celebrated Gandhi in our schools. So on Gandhi's October 2nd, we'll celebrate Gandhi's birthday. We'll put garlands on Gandhi's either pictures or statues, and we'll be given sweets and sing national songs and go home. It seemed like when I was growing up, the Gandhi was everywhere. At least his face was everywhere. Gandhi was on our currency. As you can, if you have seen a rupee bill, you'll see Gandhi. It's very ironic. He didn't want to keep the money, but he's everywhere in our money. And he was on the postage stamps. And also, we grew up listening to Gandhi's stories that how great man he was. We didn't, I mean, all other things I found out after I started studying Gandhi, but there was nothing but hagiographically that he was talked about. And one of the story I still remember, I think read in third grade or fourth grade, was the spelling cattle. And the story was that how Gandhi loved truth. And once the inspector of the school comes and gives a spelling test to students, it's really the test of the teacher. How are you teaching your students, not as the students? And he gave 5 spelling words to spell. And one among them was cattle. And, but Gandhi was the only one who got that word wrong. So the teacher comes around and pokes on his, his arm, and he goes, "Copy it from your neighbor." And Gandhi said, "Is this a test, or is it really, am I supposed to copy?" And he did not copy. And the teacher afterwards said, "You can't even copy. You are such a loser." So Gandhi thought, wow, what am I supposed to do? I think I did right that I spoke truth. So we were told, look how Gandhi was great even as he was a little boy. So he was a great man. But as I, again, grew up in high school and older and then saw, even though Gandhi's stories were all around, but his legacy had been fossilized. India had acquired nuclear weapon because it is a rather practical thing, they think, and really embrace of modern technology. Gandhi was against modern technology, but India really went after all kinds of technologies, and political corruption in India, as well as social chaos along the lines of caste system and also religious conflicts. So the Gandhi, the Mahatma, which some people think my students as his first name, it is not his first name. It is not, doesn't even mean this sir or madam or that kind of title. It really means great soul. And the title is only given to those who are yogis or saints and who embody virtues. So it seemed like that his image was there, but his message would have somehow disappeared from India. And the big questions were lurking around when I study now. And these questions included, are Gandhi's methods relevant in India today? Maybe it was just for this political campaign, but they don't have any value in the real life. And furthermore, can his method be applied to confront injustices all around the world? Or they were just an Indian thing because Indians are passive and they don't, they could do this thing, follow a Mahatma. Maybe it is not relevant for the entire world. Well, the answer came in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s successful use of the methods of nonviolence and civil disobedience. King went to India in 1959. And he writes about it, that in his essay, My Trip to India. He says, I left India more convinced than ever before that nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom. It's very interesting to see that Gandhi's legacy was revived by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When the king was born on January 15, and we are celebrating Black History Month, and Gandhi was assassinated on January 30, same month. When the assassin fired bullets at Gandhi, he wanted to silence the sound of nonviolence. But little did he know that the sound of bullets will reverberate across the oceans and will become the cries of millions seeking justice in the United States. He wanted to diminish the life force of the Mahatma, but little did he know that his method of soul force will be alive and will be used by millions across the globe. It's very interesting, the same month, This cartoon appears after King is assassinated. They meet up in heaven now. The odd thing about assassin Dr. King is that they think they have killed you. So it seems like that Gandhi's legacy becomes alive. Now he is considered as the catalyst, if not initiator, of the revolutions against colonialism, racism, and violence. Seems like that he has awakened the force of nonviolence. Again, think about the Star Wars force. I watched Star Wars with my colleague. It was very wonderful. I have not watched the earlier movies, but this one was great. Yoda Gandhi. I just love this picture. What Gandhi said, nonviolence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon. Why would Gandhi call nonviolence as a weapon? Nonviolence is supposed to be peaceful something. Nonviolence is supposed to be just vegetarian and vegan. But what happened to this weapon thing? That's very interesting that how Gandhi uses it as a weapon. He inverts the whole process, and what Indian traditions were doing, using nonviolence as simply as a virtue or as being passive. Not surprisingly, many leaders were influenced by Gandhi's teachings and philosophy. I'm sure you can recognize most of them. Cesar Chavez, Nelson Mandela, and Barack Obama said he would like to have dinner with Gandhi, but he doesn't know that he won't get much to eat if he has a dinner. Oh, well. And what the Dalai Lama, who is fighting for the Tibetans' rights, he said, today's world is in need for Gandhi's philosophy and Gandhi's principle. And from our own Central Valley, Cesar Chavez, he was deeply influenced by Gandhi, And he said, through Gandhi and my own life experience, I've learned about nonviolence, and I'm convinced that nonviolence is more powerful than violence. And then Aung San Suu Kyi, who recently won the democratic elections in Myanmar, and she says, I think Gandhi would have stood with us. So now I'm going to switch gears. So far, I talked about India. Now I'm coming to the United States. So in my 20s, I come to the United States. I meet a different kind of Gandhi. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Do you recognize this? And people have tattoos of that. I know. All kinds of tattoos if you do Google search. It's pretty interesting. I only could pick that one. This really stands for Gandhi's philosophy, Gandhi, what he believed in. But I'm sorry to break the news, he never said those things. I mean, I haven't found it. If he did, of course, he spoke a lot. But I wanted to search his 50,000 pages of books. I could not find it. So, sorry. So when I come to the States, I find that the images of Gandhi were informed by the 1982 film, Ben Kingsleys Gandhi. And that film really brought Gandhi to the popular consciousness. And it's very interesting that if you do the research on Gandhi, you say about that time is that really scholarship takes off on Gandhi as well. It's almost like the 20, 30 some years needed to really simmer that is method, and now the scholars got hold of it. And then bumper stickers, as Travis mentioned, that I was in Oregon before I came. Eugene, Oregon people love bumper stickers. If you go there, every car has like 6 or 8 bumper stickers. And I can write a whole paper on Eugene bumper stickers. And T-shirts. We in America, we love to convey our messages through T-shirt. What would Gandhi do? All kinds of T-shirts. Gandhi would never say relax. Gandhi never relaxed and never did let anyone relax around him. He was just always busy and helping others. The eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, and Gandhi's caricatured, right? The whole world pirates. I don't know where they got that. And of course, Gandhi's been used by, for advertising. Steve Jobs was very smart. I saw a picture of Steve Jobs and Gandhi side by side, that they look similar. I don't think so. So he's think different. That's the Apple slogan, think differently, rather. And so Gandhi in the popular imagination. So this really, all this, so I'm compressing all my journey for 10, 15 years in 10 minutes. So it really gave me interest to study Gandhi. I was going to go study for my graduate degree on Indian philosophical text, but I switched it and became interested in studying Gandhi. So when I began to study Gandhi, what I found, there are thousands of books about him. Goodness gracious, I thought it would be easy. And over 400 biographies. Can you imagine somebody have 400 biographies and it's growing? Every year there's a new biography. How much can you write about his life? How many ways? I think it's very interesting for people, and the scholars continue to explore various facets of his life. And then, of course, his writings and his speeches now being collected into a big data file, and it's called the Collected Works of Gandhi. And it's all available online free. So if anybody wants to go look at it. And his moral experiments are being very explored by scholars because scholars are very interested. Why is he doing these personal practices for political activism? And they explore. That's my focus of my book. And then many movements all over the world inspired by Gandhi's teachings, and there's a separate literature about it, that how many movements were inspired by Gandhi. So, but the question now has been asked, how did Gandhi do it? So the question has changed. It's not whether or not Gandhi is relevant, but the question is, how did he do it? So first is, how was he able to convince millions of Indians to join him in his fight of nonviolence? Because millions of, literally, the history tells us, so many people, he called and people showed up. And where did he get the strength to fight against injustices that required sacrifice of personal comforts, observing many fasts, and imposed imprisonment? For this, I look to his beginnings. Maybe some students think, or when we study Gandhi, maybe he wasn't just an extraordinary person. Maybe he was just so brilliant that everything just happened. But when you read his autobiography, we get a different kind of picture. He had very humble beginnings. He talks about that in his autobiography. So Gandhi was not charismatic. So he says, don't look at me as a charismatic person. As a child, he didn't display any extraordinary talents. He was extremely shy. He was painfully shy, not just shy. And he was not physically strong. He talks about that how one day he was going for a walk with a British woman, and the British woman was in her heels, and Gandhi was trying to keep up with her and could not, because the girl just went fast. So he said, well, I was so embarrassed. And he was married at age 13 and feared public speaking. He was so afraid of public speaking. He will shake when asked to speak publicly. It's interesting, in 1931, he made his first radio broadcast. The first thing that he was said, that, do I need to speak on this thing? And Gandhi confesses in his autobiography that despite his law degree from Britain, he was unable to secure a job in India. And then he had to go to South Africa to get a job. But then where did all this begin? How did he become Gandhi that we know? So for this, we have to go to South Africa. He had this direct encounter with social injustice in South Africa that awakened Gandhi to the reality of racial prejudices and injustices.
I have a ticket, a first-class ticket.
How did you get out of it?
I sent for it in the post. I'm an attorney, and I didn't have time.
There are no colored attorneys in South Africa. Go and sit where you belong.
I'll take your luggage back, sir.
No. Just a moment, please. You see? Mohandas K. Gandhi, attorney at law. I'm on my way to Pretoria to conduct a case for an Indian trading firm.
Didn't you hear me? There are no colored attorneys in South Africa.
Sir, I was called to the bar in London and enrolled at the High Court of Chancery. I am, therefore, an attorney. And since I am, in your eyes, colored, I think we can deduce that there is at least one colored attorney in South Africa.
Smart bloody Kaffir. Throw him.
Just move your black ass back to third class, or I'll have you thrown over the next station.
But I always go first class. I've traveled all...
So this was the all night long, Gandhi sat on the cold platform and reflected what just happened to him. He just couldn't believe it. And he didn't even ask for his overcoat, which was in his baggage, because he was just totally upset. Next morning, he goes to his client and he goes, "Do you know what happened to me?" He said, "Yes. Why were you in the first class to begin with?" He said, "Well, why we need to do something about this. We are human beings." He said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Something, we need to do something." He said, "Well, just get used to it." And he refused to get used to it. And that was the beginning of the Gandhi that we know. He makes this, writes in his autobiography that he makes this absolute commitment at the train station, right there, that he needs to do something. But how to do it, he does not know. What methods should be used for fighting against injustices? How do we go about it? How do we fight these authorities? So Gandhi talks about his influences, intellectual influences. So again, I'm compressing many, many years of his reflections in just a few minutes. So Gandhi begins reading, and Gandhi begins talking about the intellectual influences on him. He talks about Leo Tolstoy. He's very influenced by him for pacifism, and who interprets Christianity as a pacifist and turning the other cheek as an active resistance. And John Ruskin, who's a British thinker, he learns the welfare for all, and that becomes a really foundation for Gandhi's interest in helping all, especially the poor. And then Henry David Thoreau, he talks about, he learns the civil disobedience. And it's very interesting to talk about diversity, how he's learning so far from very different sources, and they're not Indians. And then he comes to religious influences, Sermon on the Mount, and turning the other cheek. And he quotes that often, that it really means shaming the other. It's not really saying, okay, being passive, rather being very active. And the Bhagavad Gita, he calls Bhagavad Gita his guiding light, and he learns how to do selfless service and focus on the action rather than fruits of the action. And then he talks about Jain texts. Gandhi is influenced by this tradition, Jainism. Those who are my students will be studying in my classes and have studied it. Those who have taken my classes. And it is a tradition really focuses on nonviolence as a central virtue. And if one does violence, then it incurs bad karma. So Gandhi talks about his reflections and talks about violence breeds violence. Violence perpetuates a cycle of hatred and ill will and retribution. If we keep on hitting one another, it has to stop somewhere. And we don't even know where it began to see the real beginning of an event. And the violence must be resisted, however. But how to go about it? I just love that, now we take it so granted, those captions or those posters, stop violence. And it's again, resisting violence. So Gandhi talks about there is the Western system where the lady justice is with the blindfolded and doing justice, tit for tat. And he says maybe justice should be done with open eyes, at least one eye open. And justice with open eyes of love and forgiveness. That's what he tries to do all his life. But where to begin? How to do it? He begins with himself. He said, I need to really transform myself first before I can change outward. So he goes into personal life has to be changed and nonviolence in all aspects of life. So he really expands the idea of nonviolence. It's not just as an activism, but in every aspect of one's life. And self-control. The method of nonviolence requires self-control because if you want to hit the other, you have to be self-control, not to hit back when you're hit. And the developing willpower. That's a very important ingredient of Gandhi's nonviolence. They have to have willpower to stand against the authorities, stand against injustices. So he begins to experiment with moral principles. Gandhi uses the word experiment 95 times in his biography. So here, we are talking about scientific experiments, and he talks about moral experiments. And he applies to diet, parenting, education, medicine, and I'm going to experiment with this, and I'm going to experiment with that, and constantly using that term. So his moral experiments included diet control. First is the fun thing is diet. That's a very obvious thing what we do in our life, eating. That's a very basic thing. And then he says, let me see what happens when I eat certain kind of diets, what happens if I fast, what happens. So he really is self-reflecting when he does this diet control. And also checks his willpower, that if I'm hungry for something, if I don't eat, what will happen to me? And then he reduces personal possessions. Even he discontinues health insurance of his children and his wife. People think he's crazy, right? But he says, well, I have so many millions of poor people don't have health insurance, why should I have? That was his logic. And then self-reliance. He does not ask his servants to do all this work. He said, I can do myself. He begins ironing his own clothes and old coats. Control of speech. He begins taking silence fast once a week. So Gandhi would not talk. Even a governor will come and have a meeting with him. And also how the speech should be truthful and nonviolent. And celibacy, he takes a vow of celibacy in marriage when he was 36 years old. Tells his wife, honey, we are celibate. No. So this is very controversial idea, and I really tackle it in my book. And she really goes with that. She's fine. And she goes, practicing nonviolence in all aspects of life. That's very important for him. But the one thing that becomes very central to Gandhi's philosophy is the idea of vow. Gandhi thinks that vow is something not to say, I'll try to do it, I'll make my best effort, or I take a vow and break it. For him, it is an absolute commitment. And he thinks that it's a method of resolution. How many of us take New Year resolutions? I mean, probably I broke it already, maybe. But they generally result in failed attempts most of the time. And he said the vow is a method of testing your willpower. If I take a vow, it's irrevocable. No matter what happens, I'll die before I'll break my vow. Very interesting idea of taking vows. And steps to public and social commitments. So then what he said, use the term vow to mobilize Indians, and when they were facing violence from British authorities, tell them, take a vow not to hit back, not to retaliate, not to be angry, and then they had to do that. And when they didn't, then he'll call off the strike or call off the protest. So for him to shirk taking vows betrays indecision and want of resolution. So if one does not take vows, then something is not right. If you want to build power, then you should take vows. For Gandhi, the vow was the anchor for the will. Gandhi believed that the vow was like an ship without an anchor, or like an edifice that's built on sand instead of rock. So without vows, life is a ship without an anchor. So it's important to take vows. And it doesn't mean the vow you take for a whole lifetime. Could be for one day, could be 1 week, could be 1 month. It depends. Could be for a whole lifetime. So I'd like to invite you to reflect. Have you ever taken a vow? I'm not expecting any raised hands or anything. Just think about it. Have you kept it? Was it difficult, or is it difficult? Try taking a simple vow of not exaggerating in your speech for a week. Some of my students do experiments when I teach my Gandhi courses, and they write down in their notebooks and they tell me afterwards. And they said, wow, that was hard. We didn't know that. And try quitting your favorite food or drink, Starbucks latte, for a week, if you're hooked on it. Has to be you like it. Otherwise, it doesn't mean, oh, I don't drink anyway, so it's okay. So when we study Gandhi's teachings, some scholars thought that Gandhi's vows were simply fads, his eccentric choices. But when I study closely, that the vows were very important for his not only personal life, but his political method. The vow serves 3 purposes: personal empowerment. He connected vows to nonviolent activism, using that same principle when he mobilized the masses. And finally, that he created a public image of a Mahatma, a saint, a yogi, and a mythical persona, which is that mobilized masses in India. And there's a lot of literature about it, how Indians will just go after when Gandhi show up, because Mahatma is coming, they will touch his feet, they will bow down to him, whatever he says we'll do. So it's created this image of Gandhi, of a yogi. It's not simply an image, but scholarly language, it's an image of Mahatma. For Gandhi, his finding was from these experiments, all these experiments he did, his conclusion was that strength does not come from physical capacity, it comes from indomitable will. That was his conclusion. That it's not the physical capacity that makes us strong, it is the willpower that makes us strong. So it's very interesting to see when we read his works, that his personal transformation cultivated immense physical strength in him. He fasted 17 times, ranging from 1 to 21 days. He walked 8 to 10 miles every single day. And Salt March, he walked over 15 miles every day. And he was over 60 years old. He was a great proponent of physical labor. He wanted to do everything himself. And he says, I hardly become ill because I take care of myself. And I just have very simple living. And he was imprisoned 13 times. and spent over 6 years in the prisons of India and South Africa. And Gandhi's moral charisma helped mobilize the masses. This has been recorded in the history books, that how many people were there at the Salt March. Hundreds of thousands of people came when Gandhi did the Salt March protest against the salt tax. So now I'm going to spend just a few minutes on how Gandhi's moral vows and the method of ahimsa or nonviolence are connected. So ahimsa is nonviolence, ahimsa, negation of violence, and satyagraha is a method of passive resistance. So it's commonly known as passive resistance, but Gandhi preferred the term satyagraha. He's implied the inner power plus force of truth plus love. The first one has to be complete control and willpower, then has to be on the side of the right, the side of the just, side of the truth, not for untruth, not for injustice. And then using the love force, have a complete love for the opponent. So according to Gandhi, nonviolence is a powerful weapon which only destroys evil. The opponent is not a human being, but a system, a law, institution, or behavior. And ahimsa must be practiced in thought, words, and speech. Oh, goodness. Not only one does not act violently, but not even our thoughts, not in our speech. The speech we know, action we know, but not doing in thoughts is the hardest thing. But Gandhi said that is where the violence begins, or any evil action begins in the thoughts. And nonviolence includes getting rid of hatred and ill will. So I'm going to talk about 6 principles of nonviolence. First principle is the active defiance of unjust systems and laws. Active defiance, not passive. And he says, my creed of nonviolence is an extremely active force. It has no room for cowardice or even weakness. Second principle, attack the evil, not the opponent. Attack the evil, not the opponent. He said, having flung aside the sword, there is nothing except the cup of love which I can offer to those who oppose me. I love this picture in a Vietnam War protest, giving flowers. And Dr. King talked about the principle of convert the opponent. He said the aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. So active nonviolence doesn't seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to make him or her a friend and create understanding. He wanted to be friends with the British. He didn't want to leave them with ill will. And for this, one has to trust in human goodness. Fourth principle, self-suffering and publicity. The willingness to endure suffering more than inflicting the suffering on others. Gandhi said, rivers of blood may have to flow before we gain our freedom, but it must be our blood. Boy, this is so difficult. Very difficult task, but that's what nonviolence movement requires. So Gandhi likened his jail visits to temple visits. He said, I'm going to temple. So, he always spiritualized his political actions. Fifth principle, nonviolence, a practice of ahimsa in all aspects of life. He says, very interesting, this idea. The principle of nonviolence necessitates complete abstention from exploitation in any form. So not just, again, activism. Exploitation is a form of violence. He said poverty is the biggest form of violence. How many of us think in that way? And gender violence. he fought all his life for the rights of women and environmental exploitation. Sixth principle is training for nonviolence. Some of us think that nonviolence is just we can do social media and show up for the protests and we can do it. But according to Gandhi, nonviolence method requires training, requires preparation. He said, just as one must learn the art of killing in the training for violence, so one must learn the art of dying in the training for nonviolence. I had a student when I was at the University of Oregon. He was in the Occupy Wall Street movement. And he said, Dr. Howard, when the law enforcement hit me, I was okay. I didn't hit back. But when they hit my girlfriend, I lost it. But I couldn't stop them. So this is a very difficult thing what was being told, been asked to do. So nonviolence is our strength. Now it's all over the world. There are movements talking about the nonviolence as strength. And I want to show you a glimpse of this, a force more powerful.
They were underdogs, but they challenged an empire. They won their rights, and they changed the fate of nations.
This is a chance to show the British without having to hit them, to show them that we stand for something. We are not just slaves.
They were nonviolent, but they were not passive.
Unfortunately, the concept of nonviolence for many people is that you get hit on one cheek, you turn the other cheek, you don't do anything. But nonviolence means fighting back.
When the laws were unjust, they disobeyed.
Town management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
They knew the price would be high, and they were ready to pay it.
Violence has a very simple dynamic. I make you suffer more than I suffer. That's what a war is. The difference with nonviolence is we don't want to beat the opponent up. We don't think that does any good.
Instead of making bombs, they strategized. They organized. They resisted. They boycotted. They went to jail.
When I was there in India, before coming to the United States, I thought Gandhi's methods disappeared. But now Gandhi's methods have been revived in India in all walks of life. Environmental protection, Vandana Shiva, she's really a great proponent of environmental protection, and she really believes in Gandhi's philosophy. Clean India campaign, which our own prime minister is cleaning the streets, and Gandhi really believed in hygiene and cleaned his own toilets, and he wants to clean, that India should be clean. It seemed like the force has been unleashed, like making a full circle. The story of radical nonviolent change from South Africa to India, the Serbian Revolution to the Arab Spring, from Guatemala to Black Lives Matter. One must trust the moral force. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it.